The markets are closed, but the business stories are just heating up. Hello, I'm Robert Tan. Catch up with us on Business Brief. Asian shares sank on Monday as trade tensions and the Russian-Ukraine conflict ratcheted up geopolitical uncertainty. This also resulted for the oil prices to increase. Japan's Nikkei 225 dropped by more than 1%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell nearly 2%. South Korea's Kospi slipped 0.19%, and China's Shanghai Composite declined 0.47%. Singapore's Straits Times Index was down 0.46%, and Australia's ASX 200 edged lower by 0.18%. Currency markets, meanwhile, showed mixed movements. The US dollar weakened against the Japanese yen, falling 0.38% and slipped 0.46% against the South Korean won. It also declined 0.33% versus the Thai baht and dipped 0.10% against the Singapore dollar. Meanwhile, the Australian dollar gained 0.40%. The Hong Kong dollar, on the other hand, remained flat. Gold, meanwhile, rose 0.72%. Oil prices surged with West Texas Intermediate crude climbing nearly 3%. Brent crude was also up by more than 2%, while Dubai crude inched higher by almost 0.1%. In contrast, major cryptocurrencies declined. Bitcoin slipped 0.33%, and Ethereum dropped more than 1%. The government's gross borrowings dropped to 1.14 trillion pesos in the first 4 months of the year. Data from the Bureau of the Treasury shows this is 2.4% lower than the 1.16 trillion pesos recorded in the same period of 2024. This as it front-loaded its borrowings amid volatility in the global market. The Philippine factory growth slows to 50.1 in May. Data from the latest S&P Global's Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI report, shows that this is slower than 53 growth in April due to a waning demand for new orders from foreign markets and the sharpest drop in employment in the sector in nearly a year. A PMI reading below 50 marks a contraction in the manufacturing sector, while 50 marks an expansion. S&P Global explains that this signals a broad stagnation in the sector's operating conditions. It adds that this also indicates a setback to a growth momentum built in April. The inflation rate may accelerate to 1.5% in May. Christina Ulang, head of research at First Metro Investment Corporation, tells Bilyonaryo News Channel's Business 360 that this is driven by food inflation, particularly the increase in rice prices. If her forecast comes true, this will be faster than the 1.4% inflation recorded in April. Ulang also says that the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or BSP, may cut the interest rates by 25 basis points on June 19.
Going to help the entire yield curve move lower, especially the short end of the curve. And the long end of the curve might remain elevated because of market thinking that there could be more debt supply, and then the U.S. credit rating downgrade there lurking in the background, and under the deficit may be revised, and the risk of unmet fiscal targets may be there also a concern, and therefore the long end of the curve might be higher than originally thought. But that's going to provide rich yields for investors who are into the long end, like the 10 years, the 15 year, the 25 year, and I think very good opportunity in terms of the yield, but in terms of the trading opportunity, the short end and the belly provides a lot of price upside.
Meanwhile, Speaker Martin Romualdez orders the House think tank to do a 60-day policy study that will lay the legal groundwork to institutionalize the President's 20 peso per kilo rice vision. The study will assess the policy, fiscal, and legislative requirements for sustainably implementing the program nationwide. The program starts with the poorest families in 2025, scaling up over 4 years. Initial estimates show that subsidies will cost the government 140 million pesos a day, or 51.1 billion pesos annually. Romualdez says fixing rice prices needs more than subsidies, calling for new laws, stronger NFA powers, and full reform of the supply chain, all while ensuring support for local farmers. Proposed laws include a rice assistance fund to unify subsidies, a national rice buffer stocking act, expanded rice competitiveness enhancement fund, and logistics stabilization fund to fix supply chain bottlenecks. The Department of Agriculture plans to import 150 metric tons of pork with lower tariffs to bring down pork prices. But the Meat Importers and Trade Association said each importer should be allowed to bring in a maximum of 1,000 tons to prevent a single importer from cornering the volume. Pork demand far outweighs local production, raising the need for swift action. Based on government's monitoring, pork retail prices in Metro Manila are from 350 to 430 pesos per kilo for ham and 390 to 500 pesos per kilo for belly. Transportation Secretary Vince Dizon orders the takedown of online booking platform AirAsia Move for allegedly overcharging airline tickets. During a press briefing on Monday, Dizon presented screenshots from the app to support the claim. He added that he was alerted by Leyte 4th District Representative Richard Gomez. The first example showed a Philippine Airlines ticket from Tacloban to Manila for 2 passengers was listed on AirAsia Move for as much as 77,720. But booking directly through PAL on the same date showed the same ticket costing no more than 12,600. Dizon said economic sabotage charges will be filed against the platform.
We see another ticket. Mas mura ng konti, pero 50,000 pesos. One way for 2 guests. So 25,000 pesos per person. One way, this is just absurd. No? And really bordering, well, not bordering, this is actually criminal. Bakit siya criminal? Kasi sa susunod na slide, makikita nyo kung magkano ang ticket ng PAL sa kanilang website for roughly the same period. 12,000 pesos one way. So this is 1/3 of that price. Okay? Times 3 po ang charge ni AirAsia Move.
The ongoing transportation crisis in Leyte and Samar, triggered by the closure of the San Juanico Bridge, may have been exploited by the online platform. In a text message to the Bilyonaryo News channel, AirAsia Philippines asserts the booking site is a separate entity and is not connected to the airline. Meralco is sending top officials to South Korea next month to explore joint ventures in energy production and distribution with energy giant Korea Electric Power, or KEPCO. This follows an earlier deal on smart grids and renewables. The visit includes a nuclear study tour and energy storage plant inspection. Going nuclear is still a work in progress, according to Meralco, as plans stay on paper without clear government rules. The Philippines targets 1,200 megawatts of nuclear power by 2032 under the Philippine Nuclear Energy Roadmap. The Lopez-led First Philippine Holdings sets aside 57 billion pesos in capital spending for 2025, mostly to grow its clean energy portfolio and real estate ventures. That's lower than 2024's capex, which covered the Cignal hydro plant deal. For this year's capital, 33.5 billion pesos, or over half, goes to First Gen Corporation and Energy Development Corporation. Rockwell Land and First Philippine Industrial Park secured 22 billion pesos in capex, while the remaining amount will go to FPH's other businesses. Despite headwinds, FPH stays focused on renewables, healthcare, and education. We're taking a short break. The biggest business stories from around the country are up next. You're watching Business Brief. Canadian and Australian officials lash out at U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to double tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. On Friday, Trump bared plans to double tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to 50%. He later confirmed the decision in a post on his Truth Social platform, adding that it will take effect on June 4. President of the Canadian Labour Congress said this is another direct attack on Canadian workers and a reckless move that will send shockwaves across the Canadian economy. Australian Trade Minister Don Farrell said in a statement that the latest tariff hike is an act of economic self-harm that will only hurt consumers and businesses who rely on free trade and fair trade. South Korea will minimize the impact of the 50% tariffs on steel products imposed by the U.S. The country's industry ministry says it will actively respond to the looming tariffs as part of South Korea's ongoing trade discussion with Washington. The ministry also held an emergency meeting with officials of major steel makers, including POSCO and Hyundai Steel. U.S. President Donald Trump previously said he planned to increase tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50% from 25%, which ratcheted up pressure on global steel producers and deepened his trade war. The International Air Transport Association cuts its 2025 global profit forecast due to trade tensions and declining consumer confidence. It also cites delays in jetliner deliveries that have hindered growth plans of airlines. The group now expects global airlines to post a combined profit of $36 billion this year, down from a previous forecast of $36.6 billion in December. That was before U.S. President Donald Trump took office, and Trump's sweeping tariffs have stoked fears of an economic slowdown, prompting many consumers to delay or scale back travel plans.
I think it's been something that's frustrated everybody, particularly for airlines who are waiting to take delivery of aircraft or who have aircraft sitting on the ground that they would love to see in service. So what we're trying to do is, working together to better understand where the pinch points are, to get a more accurate assessment of the forecast, so at least we can get more certainty around when issues will be resolved.
More than 30 Palestinians are reported dead and over 100 injured after violence erupts near a food aid site in southern Gaza on Sunday. Witnesses claim Israeli troops opened fire on crowds trying to collect aid, but Israel denies any involvement. In a social media post, the executive director of the UN's main agency in Palestinian territories described aid distribution as a death trap. However, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which operates the site, says there was no shooting inside the center. The FBI is investigating what it describes as a targeted terror attack in Boulder, Colorado. A group was calling for the release of Israeli hostages still held in Gaza when a man tried to set them on fire with a makeshift flamethrower. At least 6 people were hurt. The suspect has been taken into custody.
This attack happened at a regularly scheduled weekly peaceful event. Witnesses are reporting that the subject used a makeshift flamethrower and threw an incendiary device into the crowd. The suspect was heard to yell "Free Palestine" during the attack. The subject has been identified as Mohammed Sabri Solomon, and he's 45 years old. The FBI is processing the crime scene and the subject vehicle and interviewing key witnesses. We're assisting Boulder Police in providing technical, analytic, and additional forensic resources. As a result of these preliminary facts, it is clear that this is a targeted act of violence, and the FBI is investigating this as an act of terrorism.
The attack comes just weeks after a Chicago-born man was arrested for the fatal shooting of 2 employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. We're taking a short break. Business Brief. We'll be right back. The first batch of Philippine mango exports arrive in Italy. The half-ton cargo is the first of a series facilitated by Filipino businessmen with the help of the Agriculture Department and the Philippine Embassy in Rome. The mangoes come from Pangasinan. The Bureau of Plant Industry said it has all the necessary sanitary and phytosanitary certifications. The mango is the country's main product under the One Country, One Priority Product initiative of the Food and Agricultural Organization. Meanwhile, tomatoes fly through the air as the Gran Tomatina Colombia Food Fight Festival returns in the country. Revelers threw at each other tomatoes not suitable for consumption, leaving behind a messy red pool of juice on the ground. The festival, which was created to mirror Spain's La Tomatina Festival, returned this year after many years of suspension. Some 20,000 visitors are expected during the three-day festival. Some 45 tons of tomatoes will be used. Philippine shares closed the first trading day of the week in the positive territory as it snapped its two-day losing streak. The PSE index ended higher by 0.3% to close at 63.52, finishing the day as the second-best performer in Asia. Majority of the sectoral indices ended in the green, with property rising the most at more than 1%. Advancers outpaced decliners 119 to 80. Total value turnover reached 7.1 billion pesos. All of the day's most active stocks ended in the green, with First Gen rising the most at more than 16%. Meanwhile, at the foreign exchange market, the peso is currently trading at 55.82 against the greenback, weakening from previous close of 55.75. And that's a wrap for today's Business Brief. I'm Robert Tan. Join us again tomorrow as we bring you the stories that help you plan your next big, bold moves in business. Only here on the Bilyonaryo News channel. See you then.